Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike. Rostant. Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago, or YBTT, is a non-profit organization formed in 2001 focused on empowering young individuals between the ages of 18 to 35 who lack the opportunity to pursue entrepreneurial aspirations and contribute to their communities through self-employment. Now, I saw that they were promoting a discussion on failing forward, and that's a term I use from time to time. So I'm very happy that we're able to speak with General Manager Shedron Collins, as well as Director and a panelist for the Fail Forward discussion, which will be on the 17th of November, Rachel Renie. So we want to thank you both for being a part of the conversation, but we gave a small overview of what the YBTT is about. But take us a little further, please, Mr. Collins, in terms of giving us an idea. 2001 to now, what are some of those things that really stand out that you were able to do?
All right, so I just want to make sure we have enough time. So thank you for having us. We started as a lender of last resort, and what that meant is that we recognized there were a lot of persons going to financial institutions and unable to go to a financial institution, right? So we provided funds to young entrepreneurs. Rachel was actually one of our recipients of a loan, and then she transitioned from there. So her story is kind of YBTT story in terms of parallel as well. So giving that funding, we recognize that funding is really just one aspect that our entrepreneur needs, right? While funding is at the top of your mind and you need that funding first, we recognize that training and mentorship also plays a pivotal role. So you may have the funding, but do you have the training? Because running a business is different from a technical skill, right? So a business is running it's a totally different new skill, right? So learning that skill, but also having the experience, and I think mentorship comes into play, especially when we're talking about failure, right? A big part of mentorship is passing that experience that you have to an entrepreneur, right? So those failure stories, those success stories, understanding what it takes to move from point A to point B, and then in the future, point Z, this is where a mentor comes in handy. Recently, we've transitioned to looking at sustainable entrepreneurship. So not just entrepreneurs who are starting a business and adding value and creating jobs, but can we go a step further? Those who are also taking care of the people and the planet in the future. So a big part of that is where we went into.
And thank you for that. And I want to bring you in, please, Ms. Renie. And looking at the fact that your story is YBTT's story, and Madam Director, what are some of those things that specifically YBTT would have helped carry you forward? Because I like the point that Mr. Collins would have made. And sometimes, yes, you have funding and resources at the top of your mind, but if you do have a plan and you're implementing properly, that may feel as though, okay, well, we just bad spending, we just putting money behind this person, but it's leaking out. So what are some of those things that YBTT would have helped you with specifically? Thanks.
Thank you. So exactly what Shedron was saying, YBTT has been a voice. So listening as an entrepreneur, when you started, you just want someone to hear your story. You want someone to listen, right? Before they tell you no, they will at least listen to what you have to say. But I think as an entrepreneur, you always know, you know what you're passionate about, and you know that core elements of your business. But what you don't always know is everything else that makes up the business, right? And this is where YBTT comes in. They offer financing, which I think when I started, that was vital to just even start, because I think starting is where you kind of confirm you're an entrepreneur, you've proven your concept, you've gotten it out there. But what I think is so important is they've supported me throughout my entire growth stage as an entrepreneur. So as soon as I got the money, I needed a mentor, I needed guidance, I needed capacity building. The second thing I did was training, how to do, your financials, how to do basic training skills for running a business. The mentor, of course, helped along that journey because you need to be able to just talk or vent with someone. And then from there, now there's even more opportunities around, applying for larger support or larger opportunities through their training and upskilling programs. But overall, I think it's really just listening to what the entrepreneur has to say. And I think this is a big part of the YBTT value system, is that we actually listen to entrepreneurs and we want to hear their story, but we also hold them accountable to making it a viable business. So,
and I think sometimes when you say something, it becomes a little more tangible, and even more so when you write it down. And when you're doing that in terms of somebody who's not just your friend or your sound bubble, and they ask certain questions, and sometimes those questions are very disgusting, huh? Because they force you to look and better articulate what it is you're doing. I mean, oh shucks, no, I didn't do that, or no, I didn't think about that. But how do you match up young entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs with mentors? Is it that you have a pool, Mr. Collins, that YBTT would go through and say, I think this is a good match? Do you find out who it is you're working with and then try to find somebody best fit for them? What is that process like?
Well, it's evolving, right? First process was matching persons to mentors. Our mentors are volunteers, right? So besides giving their experience, they're actually giving time, right? So they are volunteering this process, and Rachel left out a part of her story in terms of she was a mentor transition from actually an entrepreneur supported to a mentor to a director. So that's the story being told there, right? So what we do is that we do usually calls to different mentors, talk to different persons, business persons, referrals from there. One of the key things that we learned is that you don't always have to be in the same business to understand someone's business. So we don't need to match a barber with a barber, right? You already kind of have that skill and developing that skill. What you really need to understand from a mentoring standpoint is, how do I turn this skill into a business? And sometimes that's why you need somebody outside of your world to really ask you questions in terms of, have you thought about renting a chair? Have you thought about, hey, you have this wall. Have you thought about advertising on this wall? And ask you those hard questions about, how are we going to generate more money? How are you managing your finances? Did you pay your taxes? Right? Those kind of questions being asked from there and holding you, like Rach said, in terms of accountable to making sure that, hey, I'm not just working a hobby, but I'm running a business. And that's the transition we're trying to make. We've recently started group mentorship. So while we have one-on-one mentorship, we put in place a mentor who facilitates a group. And what happens there, similar to if you go to an AA meeting, right? You have peer-to-peer support and help each of the peers hold each other accountable. So it's not just the mentor, but you have that, I guess, a small, close-knit family of persons there to support you as an entrepreneur, both at your peers level and both as a mentor level.
And even before we take a short break, how do people get onto YBTT? How do people avail themselves of everything that the organization has to offer? And is there a screening process that people would go through? Say, okay, well, I'll help you, but you need to do a little more and come back. What is that like?
So there are several avenues. Usually it's through our programs. That's the best way to connect with us. So once we advertise a program that is going on, connecting with us directly through the program. Depending on the program, there are requirements. So if it's our Jumpstart program, we look at persons who are at that early stage, who are trying to now build a foundation, persons who are making that transition from working to now being an employer from that aspect. Where we had our accelerator programs, we look for persons who are already in business and they can show us some concrete, viable proof of concept. Is this working? Do you have customers, right? A lot of persons who are in business and have no customers, right? Do you have customers? Do you have a plan in place? What's the future for this plan? And most importantly, does what our programs offer, would it add value to you? And I think that's the key thing. So we can offer a program and you may be a great entrepreneur, but if our program and services can't add value to where you are right now, then you're not the right person for it.
And with that, we take a short break. We are speaking with the General Manager of Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago, Shedron Collins, as well as Director and a panelist. When we realize we haven't spoken about failing forward yet, we're doing that inside the next half. Stay with us. We return with more. We're speaking with Shedron Collins and Rachel Renie. Welcome back. We are speaking with Shedron Collins, General Manager of Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a director, someone who's gone through the phases and is able to speak to those. Rachel Renie, panelist for the Fail Forward discussion, as well as a YBTT director. And we hear it in the literature, Ms. Renie, we hear it in songs. We hear people say, I don't lose, I learn. And Kwame Ture would have spoken about not going back to zero, but going back to a higher quality of zero. When you say failing forward, though, what do you mean? What was meant in this particular instance?
Well, as an entrepreneur, it means a lot of things, but I think anyone attending the events or being a part of it is witnessing that there's a real aspect to what you're doing, right? And with anything real and authentic, there is failure within that. And failure is viewed in many different ways. I think for entrepreneurs, it's like, how do I try this again? How do I tweak this again? Right? And it's understanding that those failures are what teaches you how to do it, how not to do it the next time. I think the skill in entrepreneurship is not failing to tumble, but just failing so you can still get back up and try again, right? So you have to balance how much risk, how viable it is, your proof of concept. Have you asked more than just your family members if this product tastes good or works well? So it's really figuring out that formula of failure. And once you accept it, you realize I don't call it failures anymore. I see it as learning, lessons learned or what not to do. So we put it in the what not to do pile. Or maybe it just needs tweaking. And as Shedron mentioned, sometimes you need that external voice or that external viewpoint to tell you, maybe try it this way. So failing forward is definitely part of the entrepreneurial journey. And we hope to share, I think it was really interesting to see the board come out and share these stories because sometimes we're always behind the scenes. So I think coming forward and sharing our failures is going to invite more entrepreneurs to share their experiences. And we hope that when persons attend the event, we can discuss it and maybe give some feedback around those things. So.
And we're going to ask Mr. Collins about the panelists in just a bit, but I want to stay with something that you would have said, Ms. Renie. And it feels sometimes as though, as a society, we are very risk averse. So how much of it is having a formula and saying, okay, well, I'm putting this in this pile, I'm putting that in that pile, versus just saying, okay, well, for me to do better, for me to get where I want to go, where I want to take this business to go from outside of being a hobbyist to being an entrepreneur, which is a distinction in and of itself. How do I say, okay, well, this is the amount of risk that I'm willing to take?
Right. So, I mean, risk is relative, right? Every time you get into your car or you take a plane ride, it's a risk that you're taking, right? So it's ascertaining how much of this risk, and I think the formula is how many hours, how much money you're going to invest in it, how much hours you're going to invest in it, and really seeing what's the return that's going to support that investment, right? It may sound technical, but it really is that. If I invest 20 hours into something, I expect to see, a certain amount of output out of that investment. So being risk averse, we pose ourselves to risks every day, right? So it's really figuring out how to desensitize yourself a bit, meaning it's not as scary as you think, because you get in your car and you make it to where you have to go. And, you know, if you look at the statistics, it's a risky thing to get in your car, right? But it's figuring out that it's, you know, how to measure it accurately. And exactly that. You need to look at it yourself, but you also need to share it with your team, whoever's working with you within the business. You need to share it with your customers. Is this a viable option? Do you think this can work? And again, with agencies like the Youth Business of Trinidad and Tobago, that can give you that external eye that is based on experience, not just feelings. It's based on thousands of entrepreneurs that we would have encountered over the years, you know?
And I guess this is something that you're also measuring real time and tweaking as you go along, as opposed to say, well, I started 4 years ago and that's the same information that I'm working with, but I'm not sure why it's not working out for me at this point in time. But I see you nodding your head, Mr. Collins. So I'll ask you to give me your take on that, in addition to letting us know who the other panelists are. Thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny, right? When we went to ride a bike, the first thing we do is know that we're going to fall, right? So starting a business, we like to say it's like riding a bike, right? So a couple of entrepreneurs would have failed, and it may not be that you're starting, you're building on that business, but you're taking the lessons learned from that failure to another business that you're starting from there. So failure is part of the entrepreneurial journey, and I think, like you said, there's a stigma behind it, right? We also work in schools, and we're going to these schools to ask them to do a pitch, a business pitch, come up with a business idea, let's hear the business pitch. And you would hear the students say, you know, sir, I have an idea, but I don't want to pitch it because I'm not sure if it'll make sense, and I don't want people to laugh at me. And that is what the mindset is of a student, right? I know we always have those ideas that kids are bright-eyed and the failure hasn't set in yet, so they're free to do anything. They're taking their highest risks. But when it comes to business, you're hearing them say, you know, I don't want to tell anybody about the idea. I'm afraid that people will reject the idea, right? So it's how do we even nurture the kids to believe that if you don't try, you're automatically going to fail. So you might as well try, right? And that's the learning process that we want them to get into. So we had a competition in the past, and there was one school that was supposed to get the top 5 persons. Only 4 persons submitted. So the rest of the class were wondering, you know, if I had at least attempted to submit something, I would have at least won something. So without the attempt, you're already failing. And that's the whole process. The trying is not the failure. The not attempting is the failure. So with that in mind, we kind of created well, we pick and choose, and we looked at the board members and we looked at those who, I mean, we ended up with denying of the board members. We could tell that story. But we said, you know, let's kind of create a diverse group of persons who have different experiences. So we've already had Rachel can tell her story as an entrepreneur, not just a YBTT story, but even traversing the entire ecosystem, right? And the failures that she would have along her journey, from starting her business with the wrong paper bag to exporting, right? So that story you can hear from there. We also have Marcus Suncow, and he's the managing director of Fresh Start Juices. And that's a generational business. So you're now hearing the generational failures that would have been made throughout that story from there. We also have Jason Roche, and Jason is a director for the Greater Tunapuna Chamber as well, right? So along with his story, you can tell the stories of other business persons from the chamber. And then obviously it's what part of failure is a reputation management curve, and that's where our Lisa and Joseph would come in. So from a reputation management standpoint, how do you address that failure? She runs her own company as well. So putting those collective together, and one of the great things that we did in this registration is ask persons to share their failures, right, within the registration process. So even from a registration standpoint, you're beginning for them that conversation about talking about your failures. And that's really what we want to have. a conversation, a discussion, and even an awareness that all entrepreneurs feel at some point in time. And it's part of the journey.
And just as we close, you actually raised the point, well, you, in my mind anyhow, being afraid to try, so not trying and therefore failing, how much that is compounded now by the immediacy of a lot of the things that we deal with in terms of being able to be content creators, so people seeing you from wherever, so people being afraid of it like that. So that is something, and I say it a little differently. When I was outside doing the most, I'm glad that there weren't phones, and when the phones came, they weren't smartphones with cameras and all these sorts of things, because we might not be having these conversations. But we know it is on the 17th of November. Ms. Renie, you'll take us out, please, in terms of registration. Is it still possible? How do people be a part of it? Will it be possible to view after?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the Youth Business of Trinidad and Tobago's Facebook page or Instagram page. All the information is there. You can still register. We hope that more persons will come on board. I think it's going to be really enlightening. And of course, we will share all the insights. What I will say is become a part of the Youth Business of Trinidad and Tobago's community at any stage. At any stage, you can gain value. So just register on the site, register on the pages, send us an email. Don't message Shedron directly, but or maybe you can, because he used to answer my messages in the just really put yourself out there and let's discuss the opportunity that can come from discussing our failures.
And with that, we want to thank you both so much, Rachel Renie and Shedron Collins of Youth Business Trinidad and Tobago. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you so much for joining us.